must seek to deprive these of every satisfaction, and leave them as it were in darkness and the void. Let your soul, therefore, turn always, not to what is most easy, but to what is hardest; not to what tastes best, but to what is most distasteful; not to what most pleases, but to what disgusts; not to matter of consolation, but to matter for desolation rather; not to rest, but to labor; not to desire the more, but the less; not to aspire to what is highest and most precious, but to what is lowest and most contemptible; not to will anything, but to will nothing; not to seek the best in everything, but to seek the worst, so that you may enter the love of Christ into a complete destitution, a perfect poverty of spirit, and an absolute renunciation of everything in this world. Embrace these practices with all the energy of your soul, and you will find in a short time great delights and unspeakable consolations. Despise yourself, and wish that others should despise you. Speak to your own disadvantage, and desire others to do the same. Conceive a low opinion of yourself, and find it good when others hold the same. To enjoy the taste of all things, have no taste for anything. To know all things, learn to know nothing. To possess all things, resolve to possess nothing. To be all things, be willing to be nothing. To get to where you have no taste for anything, go through whatever experiences you have no taste for. To learn to know nothing, go whither you are ignorant. To reach what you possess not, go whithersoever you own nothing. To be what you are not, experience what you are not." Close quote. These later verses play with that vertigo of self-contradiction which is so dear to mysticism. Those that come next are completely mystical, for in them St. John passes from God to the more metaphysical notion of the all. Quote, "When you stop at one thing, you cease to open yourself to the all. For to come to the all, you must give up the all. And if you should attain to owning the all, you must own it, desiring nothing. In this spoliation the soul finds its tranquility and rest. Profoundly established in the center of its own nothingness, it can be assailed by naught that comes from below, and since it no longer desires anything, what comes from above cannot depress it, for its desires alone are the causes of its woes." Close quote. And now, as a more concrete example of heads 4 and 5, in fact of all our heads together, and of the irrational extreme to which a psychopathic individual may go in the line of bodily austerity, I will quote the sincere Suso's account of his own self-tortures. Suso, you will remember, was one of the 14th century German mystics. His autobiography, written in the third person, is a classic religious document. Quote, "He was in his youth of a temperament full of fire and life, and when this began to make itself felt, it was very grievous to him, and he sought by many devices how he might bring his body into subjection. He wore for a long time a hair shirt and an iron chain, until the blood ran from him, so that he was obliged to leave them off. He secretly caused an undergarment to be made for him, and in the undergarment he had strips of leather fixed, into which 150 brass nails, pointed and filed sharp, were driven, and the points of the nails were always turned towards the flesh. He had this garment made very tight, and so arranged so as to go round him and fasten in front, in order that it might fit the closer to his body, and the pointed nails might be driven into his flesh, and it was high enough to reach upwards to his navel. In this he used to sleep at night. Now in summer, when it was hot, and he was very tired and ill from his journeyings, or when he held the office of lecturer, he would sometimes, as he lay thus in bonds and oppressed with toil, and tormented also by noxious insects, cry aloud and give way to fretfulness, and twist round and round in agony, as a worm does when run through with a pointed needle. It often seemed to him as if he were lying upon an ant-hill from the torture caused by the insects, for if he wished to sleep, or when he had fallen asleep, they vied with one another. Sometimes he cried to Almighty God in the fullness of his heart, "Alas, gentle God, what a dying this is! When a man is killed by murderers or strong beasts of prey, it is soon over, but I lie dying here under the cruel insects, and yet cannot die." The nights in winter were never so long, nor was the summer so hot as to make him leave off this exercise. On the contrary, he devised something farther, 2 leathern loops into which he put his hands, and fastened one on each side his throat, and made the fastenings so secure that even if his cell had been on fire about him, he could not have helped himself. This he continued until his hands and arms had become almost tremulous with the strain, and then he devised something else, 2 leather gloves, and he caused a brazier to fit all over with sharp-pointed brass tacks, and he used to put them on at night, in order that if he should try, while asleep, to throw off the hair undergarment, or relieve himself from the gnawings of the vile insects, the tacks might then stick into his body. And so it came to pass. If ever he sought to help himself with his hands in his sleep, he drove the sharp tacks into his breast, and tore himself so that his flesh festered. When after many weeks the wounds had healed, he tore himself again, and made fresh wounds. He continued this tormenting exercise for about 16 years. At the end of this time, when his blood was now chilled, and the fire of his temperament destroyed, there appeared to him in a vision on Whitsunday a messenger from heaven, who told him that God required this of him no longer, whereupon he discontinued it, and threw all these things away into a running stream." Close quote. Suso then tells how, to emulate the sorrows of his crucified Lord, he made himself a cross with 30 protruding iron needles and nails. This he bore on his bare back between his shoulders day and night. Quote, "The first time that he stretched out this cross upon his back, his tender frame was struck with terror at it, and blunted the sharp nails slightly against the stone. But soon, repenting of this womanly cowardice, he pointed them all again with a file, and placed once more the cross upon him. It made his back, where the bones are, bloody and seared. Whenever he sat down or stood up, it was as if a hedgehog's skin were on him. If anyone touched him unawares, or pushed against his clothes, it tore him." Close quote. Suso next tells of his penitences by means of striking this cross and forcing the nails deeper into the flesh, and likewise of his self-scourgings, a dreadful story, and then goes on as follows. Quote, "At this same period the servitor procured an old castaway door, and he used to lie upon it at night without any bedclothes to make him comfortable, except that he took off his shoes and wrapped a thick cloak round him. He thus secured for himself a most miserable bed, for hard pea-stalks lay in humps under his head, the cross with the sharp nails stuck into his back, his arms were locked fast in bonds, the horsehair undergarment was round his loins, and the cloak too was heavy and the door hard. Thus he lay in wretchedness, afraid to stir, just like a log, and he would send up many a sigh to God. In winter he suffered very much from the frost. If he stretched out his feet, they lay bare on the floor and froze. If he gathered them up, the blood became all on fire in his legs, and this was great pain. His feet were full of sores, his legs dropsical, his knees bloody and seared, his loins